All right, so this video is going to pick up where the last one left off, and that is that we have been exploring the window object, and we've been exploring the window methods. So I want to show you, at one point I alluded into the video that, the last video, that our window object returns properties, which in this case, for example, is a value. It's a true or false value. But sometimes the property returns another object. So I'm going to show you an example of that. And so here you can see that console returns a console object and document returns a document object. And we'll get to that one in a minute. But let's just do this. I'm going to go to location. So it says that location returns the location object for the window. So let's look back at this DOM image. And I'm going to show you again that there's a window and it has children objects, and one of them is location. And so what is happening here then is that using window and location, we're going to get this object with its own set of methods and properties. In other words, let's click on the location object. And location object, in fact, has properties and methods that are unique to just the location object. In other words, host name or path name are only properties of location. In other words, I couldn't say window path name. I have to reference the whole chain. In other words, I'm going to have to say go to the window, go to the window's child location, and location has a property that I want to address or get the value of. So let's use an example and we'll choose path name. And so let me shrink this up a little bit. So we're going to go back to the example that we've started before. And let's see, this is an example of what we're going to call the dot notation. Returning. Okay. And so what we want to do is I'm going to do, I guess, a window alert. And I'm going to get I have to use that whole chain of hierarchy. In other words, I have to start with the parent, who is named window. Then I need to go down that chain. So remember, it's returning an object. So I have to go to window, and then I'm going to get this location object. In order to denote that or to use that, I use the dot notation. So I'm going to go window dot, and then the name of the object that I'm trying to get to, and then a dot and the property that I want to use, in this case, path name. And so I have to tell the browser the whole hierarchy. I have to say the parent, the child, and then the grandchild, or however you want to look at that. But I have to notate the entire path to get to location's path name. So let's go ahead and run that and see if it, in fact, just demonstrates something. There's the hello world from before. Okay. And sure enough, there is the path name of this file. And so when you're going down that hierarchy, as we're going down the hierarchy here of objects, we have to always reference, for example, let's say we were wanting to get to a button. In order to get to the button here, we would have to go window, dot, document, dot, form, dot, button. So in order to just navigate down the path, you have to make sure you reference the entire chain hierarchy in order to get to the object that you're trying to reach. So that being said, I am going to add one exception to that rule. So here we did window.location.pathname. Now you have seen me do things like alert and then without the window. Well, how come? Well, because window is the parent, so to speak, is the root, it's just kind of assumed that that's the default. So if you leave window off, that's okay. So that would work. Since alert is a method of window, you could do it either way. Oh, not blah, where did that get? Or alert, okay. So as long as it's an immediate object child of window, then you don't need the window, it's assumed. So that's the same thing with document. Let's go back to this. So let me go back. So I've been doing document right. So document is a property of the window object. So window.document, and if I click on document, then we should see that document has, now document's a little bit different in the documentation here, and they, for some reason, in this particular documentation, they mix the properties and the methods together. So how can you tell the difference? Well, properties do not have the parenthesis. Properties just has the word, the property name, and any kind of method will have parentheses, because ideally, since it can do things, we can make it do lots of things inside the parentheses. So anything with the parentheses is the method, anything without the parentheses is the property. So again, so if I got returned a document object, if I go down far enough, I should have a method called write. So go, method called write, there it is. And so that's the method that I'm referencing when we do this document write. So because window is assumed, that is the parent of document, that's the parent object or the root of document, I can leave it out. This is correct or this is correct. So either way, so that's why you don't see window on there all the time. It's implied, it's the default. All right, so let's look at a different method of document. So again, I'm in the document object and I'm looking for the document's properties and methods. And I'm going to look for a method called getElementById, which is here. Returns the element that has the ID attribute with the specified value. Okay, that's kind of wordy. Let's figure out what that means. So just for clarity or for cleanliness, so I don't have a bunch of alert boxes that are unrelated, I'm going to comment out the rest of my code. And I already have this code in memory, so I'm just going to append it in here so you don't have to watch me click. And I'm going to explain it. So I'm creating a variable. Remember, we set up our variables with var. I don't have to declare the type of data type in JavaScript. I can put whatever I want in it. So I'm just going to call it my image. And I'm using document getElementById to get hold of, and my intention is going to be to get hold of an image. And so I should have somewhere an image. In my mind, it's going to be an image. Remember, document getElementById can be any element, but I'm going to use this one to create an image. So I use this variable name, myImage, to try and make that clear. So, and then it's going to write what is in that variable. So what did I accomplish by getting this? What exactly is getElementById getting? And that's what I want to try and demonstrate to you. So I'm going to put up here an image source equals, I have an image called stitch. I'll put in an alt tag, another stitch image, and then we'll do an ID equals my image. And so what's happening then, and we'll demonstrate that, is JavaScript is going to go get whatever has an ID of my image, which happens to be this entire element, and it's treating it as if it's an object. So we've used the word element, now I'm going to use the word object. And so as an object, it's going to have properties and methods. Well, this source is a property of this object. This alt is a property of this object. And so is ID. I'll demonstrate this a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to refresh our page. And now what you're going to see is, of course, so there's our image, but look what document.write wrote. It let us know that it has this variable has content of an object. It is an object. And what type of object is it? In this case, it's an HTML image element. So the object is an image. So think of it as an object. It's even telling you, I'm thinking of it as an object. All right, so I do want to demonstrate as a side note, if I put this image tag below the script, what will happen? Will anything happen? I don't know. Let's see. So now what happens? Now we're document writing null. Why is that? What happened there? Well, remember that the browser's reading everything as it comes. So every line is read and evaluated at the time it's read. So as the browser's reading each line and it gets to this line, it says, go get an element by ID named myImage. Well, up to this point, only everything above it has been written to the browser page. So nothing above this line of code has been written that has this ID yet. And so therefore, null is put into myImage. And when we ask it to write it, therefore we're writing null, because the browser hasn't encountered this image yet. So we have to put it above that. So now that we've put it above, when we get to this line of code, the browser says, oh yeah, I have an element called my image, and there it is. So now that object is put into my image, and again, when I run this, now I see that this variable, my image, has an object in it in which I have access to all of the properties. All right, let me take this point again. Now let's add another object. Okay. Add another object. Okay, and now I'm going to do an h1 tag. Let's see, I'm going to call it my h1 object is equal to document.getElementById, and we'll call it the header. Okay, and we'll document write that. Document.write my h1 object. Okay, so kind of this on the same vein here, just kind of doing another example of the same thing. h1, so we'll call this the DOM object, oh not DOM, DOM object, and then this has to have an ID in it because we said we were going to grab this ID, and this ID was the header, so I'll just copy that in there. Okay, so now when we do this document write, let's see what happens. So now I have an object. Let's see, my image has an object. It has an image element object, and my h1 object has an object of type HTML heading element. Okay, so why is that important? I will share with you. All right, so now that we have an object in our hand, my image, this variable, has an object or an element. So it's synonymous with saying we have in memory, utilizing this variable, this entire element. And with that, as a result, we also have access to all of its individual properties, source, alt, and ID. So let's see how that works. So my object, remember that dot notation we've been doing. So my image dot, let's try and get the alt and see if that works. So document write this object's alt tag. Let's see if that works. All right, so it did. Another stitch image. Okay, let's try to do some more. Let's concatenate. I'm going to just put a space in there for readability. Let's concatenate my image, and we'll put in the ID. Let's print that out. So any of the attributes, sure enough, there it is. So any of the attributes or properties that this object or element has, we have access to using the variable that we use to get the object, and then using the dot notation to get to the properties or methods of that object. Okay, so out of curiosity then, and this is just for demonstration, we have agreed that my h1 object is holding this object, correct? So, or this element. So does it make sense then to put the dot alt here? Well, what will happen? Let's go ahead and try it. So it says, it's hard to read, so let me make this more readable. Let's add a plus BR. Okay, now let's try that. So we're putting in a break return so that things are a little bit clearer. So here's what's being printed is undefined. Well, why is it undefined? Well, remember that document getElementById, when we used it to get the header, that got a hold of a different element or object, which has different properties. Obviously, image does not have the same properties as h1. It does have an ID, so we could put ID here, but there's no alt tag associated with an h1, so we're getting undefined. There doesn't exist. So if we put something else like ID, then we should no longer get undefined, but now we're getting the header. So it's your responsibility as the programmer, when you use getElementById, to be aware of which object it is you're getting, you're retrieving with that method, and therefore utilizing or trying to access the appropriate attributes. All right, so let's do another example. I'm going to introduce you to one more property called innerHTML, INNER HTML. And we're going to do a search on that. innerHTML DOM innerHTML property. All right, okay. So innerHTML, here it is explained, and so you can look through this if you want to get more edification on what I've been doing. But the purpose of the HTML tag is this. Let me just demonstrate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize this h1 object that we got a little earlier, and I'm going to say, well, here we're typing out the ID. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say document, I didn't do that the way I wanted to, my h1 object, okay? And then I'm going to utilize that inner HTML. I'm just going to demonstrate it first, and then equals a new heading. So let's just see what happens when I do that. So when I reload this page, this says the DOM object. Now watch what happens. And it gets changed to a new heading. So what happened there? So the inner HTML, it is a property, so it's just changing a value. And what it's doing is it's taking this object, whatever this object happens to be, and you and I know that it's, in this case, this h1 tag, and it's going to look at the opening and closing tag. In other words, this is the opening tag, and this is the closing tag of that object, and it's going to replace whatever is in here with my new string, which is exactly what it did. So if we put something else, another heading, I mean, it doesn't matter, but we can see that, and I know at this point it's like, well, why didn't you just put that up there in the first place? Well, we're just demonstrating a concept right now, so just walk with me for a little bit and we'll see how that works. So now we've got another heading. So inner HTML will take an opening and closing tag and replace it with whatever you have here in your string, or you might have a variable or anything along those lines. So let's do the same thing with my image. So we have an object, my image, and we're going to do inner HTML equals, I don't know, let's do, here is my image, for example, and let's see what happens. So I'm going to run it again, and well, nothing happened. Why is that? Well, because I explained that the inner HTML has an opening and closing tag, right? But images don't. Images are one of those rare elements that have just an opening tag, but there is no end image, right? It's just image. And so therefore, this particular property does not work with the object that we're using here for my image. So that's not appropriate there. So we have to think about, when we're doing these things, when we use document getElementById, what element are we getting? Remember that we're getting an object. And so once we have that object in our hand, what part of that object do we want more specifically? And we saw that. We saw here that we were either printing out the fact that we had an object, or with the dot notation, we're getting to that object's property that we really were interested in. I utilized a variable here, but there's no reason why. Let me see which one of these. Like this one, for example. If we wanted to reword this and did document getElementById, the header, so I'm going to copy that. And if we wanted to replace this, let me just do it on a different line. So I could also, not incorrect, but also available, document, move so I can see what I'm doing, please, thank you, right. And then I could do a getElementById here. Well, now we know we've gotten the object, right? And in order to get to that object's property, we're going to do a dot ID. So that would be synonymous to what I did up here, where I just put it in a variable. This is not putting it in a variable, it's just putting it all into one line instead. So it would still work. Type, oh good, type reference is not found. So now I said, oh good, no one likes to see an error message, but it's good to see that you have error messages. So it says my h1 object is not defined. So let's figure out what that is. It says on line 31. So on line 31, oh, so now that I got rid of my variable, this line no longer makes sense, right? And so that's why a variable is handy here, because I'm utilizing it more than once. So in order to fix this error, I no longer have a my h1 object, so I would have to in order to fix it, get all of this object information and change this. And so now I could do it that way. So now I'm getting the object. Once I have the object, I'm going to use the dot to get at one of its properties, which is innerHTML. Save that, and now if I run it, it seems to be working. So you have to really be clear when you're utilizing getElementById that first of all, I'm getting an object. Be clear on which object you're getting. And once you have that object, then with the dot notation, you can get at the different properties or methods, as we've seen, of that particular object.